This week marked the end of the filing period for the March primary. That means the candidate field is set for races from governor to Congress to your county commissioners. Now comes the rush to try to win your vote in an election that's rapidly approaching. For Inside this week, we're looping in some experts who cover politics here in Texas religiously. We have Scott Braddock from the Quorum Report, we have Brad Johnson from the Texan, and of course James Berrigan, who covers politics for the Texas Tribune. So first of all, thank you guys so much for being here. Let's kind of jump right into it, okay? Let's talk about the deadline finally passing. Any filing surprises that really kind of you weren't expecting this week?
Well, the best days of filing period are the first day and the last day. That's when you figure out who's really going to do what. It's put up or shut up time, as I like to say. And on the last day, that's when you really do get the surprises. Either the person who has talked for months that they're going to run for something, it turns out they don't run, or you have somebody just sort of come out of nowhere like a Rick Perry, who's not actually the Rick Perry everyone knows. It's some random guy named Rick Perry.
And that got complicated too. I know, Brad, you had tweeted about that. Kind of walk me through what you first noticed when this Rick Perry, who's not the former governor Rick Perry, filed.
Well, I'd heard that someone filed a challenge to his candidacy with the Republican Party of Texas and looked more into it. And after looking through it, the RPT ruled that the challenge to his candidacy was invalid and therefore he could stay on the ballot. There's a different section of code that overrules the main section during primaries. And so that was what they operated from.
And that's because he had already filed for a different race, is that right?
Precinct chair, yes.
Got it.
But he also filed a withdrawal letter with the Parker County GOP, and that was accepted. So.
But probably the challenge is because if there's another Rick Perry on the primary ticket for Republicans, that complicates things for the other candidates, right? Particularly Greg Abbott. You know, Rick Perry was a very popular governor. He's the longest-serving governor, and that complicates it. So that was a very interesting turn, I thought.
And he's still popular, and I think obviously the question is how many votes does he siphon off from Greg Abbott, but also how does it affect polling? That affects decisions campaigns make throughout the entire campaign, and so that's another effect that he'll have.
Scott, how many Texans do you think who don't maybe follow politics that closely will go to the polls, see Rick Perry, and actually vote for the not Rick Perry?
Well, that's the thing. In any election, you always have at least 1 or 2% of people who don't really watch shows like this or don't, really get into the weeds of what's going on. They may just go to the voting booth, and they may not be happy with Abbott right now, and they may not be impressed with the other people who are there, and they see Rick Perry and they think, oh, I like him. They go with him, and the deal is, if Governor Abbott is having any problem getting to 50%, this is why it's actually important. In a primary, if you're forced into a runoff as an incumbent, that is where you do not want to be. There was some reporting, right, that there may be some connections between this Rick Perry and some of the other candidates who are running against Abbott. If he's having a problem getting to 50%, which he would need to get over 50% to avoid a runoff, and only that 1 or 2% of people vote for Rick Perry, well, then all of a sudden he's in a runoff with a Don Huffines or an Alan West, and that's a place, if you're Greg Abbott, you don't want to be there.
What about the race for Attorney General? Obviously, this is one of the primaries that we're watching extremely closely. It's going to be maybe one of the most interesting. Paxton's got problems. We know he has problems, but do you think voters care?
This is a race where I wish it was more nuanced, but it may be as simple as this. He has the Trump endorsement in the primary. That may be all that matters. I think the entrance of Louis Gohmert, far right arch conservative congressman from East Texas who now has to retire because he's running for AG, he can at least give some conservative credibility to the accusations against Paxton, which I would say they're already pretty credible. But the voters can't just dismiss the things that Gohmert and others would be talking about as some sort of liberal plot or anything like that. Nobody's going to call Gohmert a rhino or the establishment, right? So I think it could get a little more interesting, but if it just turns out that it's just the Trump endorsement and that's it, well then that's it. And you can pretty much factor in the fact that you had George P. Bush earlier in the year thinking that's what it was. Remember the koozies he was handing out that had him and Trump's picture on the back saying, this is the only Bush that got it right. Right? This is the one who likes me and I like him. And then, of course, Trump after that endorsed Paxton, and so Bush had pushed in all his chips on Trump, and it didn't work out.
We've seen Bush raise a lot of money, but Paxton, we saw he just had a $750,000 fundraiser with former President Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and so that advantage is kind of wiped out there, at least for the moment. Does that continue? I don't know. But it's also, you mentioned Louis Gohmert, he is incredibly popular among the Republican Party base, and so if he's certainly probably will have more effect on the race than like Matt Krause would have, who is a state rep up in Fort Worth and siphoned to a smaller area. So I think, we'll see what happens, but Louis Gohmert will have some effect on this race.
Do you think that Gohmert entering could maybe pull some votes, the super conservative votes that would go to Paxton because he has the Trump endorsement, and maybe boost Bush up a little bit, just because Bush could pull some of the more moderate voters, and then we could see the conservative vote split a bit and push it into, a runoff?
I'll tell you what, I think that's what George P. is crossing his fingers and saying, I hope that happens, because in the limited polling we've seen, General Paxton is still very close to the 50% mark, and the second closest person is George P. Bush in the high 20s, low 30s, so he's not that close. He's got to make up a lot of ground. And look, it's a full-on battle royale here. There's a lot of good competitors, a lot of name recognition, but at a certain point, they've got to stop hammering on this, on the legal troubles, right? Because it only matters to a certain kind of voter. They've got to sell sort of what are my ideas, what can I do better, and so far, I don't think that has developed yet. I think that's going to ramp up in the next couple of months.
And on those races where the candidates agree about just about everything, I mean, most of these candidates, they agree 98% on issues. That's always when the races get the nastiest, because it has to be about something else. It has to be about the legal issues. It's not about issues, it's about personalities. And those get to be pretty fun races to cover, but in the end, the voters are going to get to decide, and they're going to probably go with the person that either has the Trump backing or they see as the most conservative.
And I think that's the challenge for the challengers. They're all saying, I am the conservative option that doesn't have the legal troubles. But if the voters are saying, well, they're all saying the same thing, they may get confused and say, well, I might just stick with this guy because he's the incumbent and I know him.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for this insight. Always really helpful, and it'll be really interesting to watch how this plays out over the next couple months. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks,
Thank you.
New rules are giving the state's top high school athletes chances to turn their star power into cash in college.
It's awesome. It's a great opportunity for these student athletes that work very hard.
How a bill passed by state lawmakers added opportunities for these young athletes to make money.